Well, hello again, my friends, and welcome once more to the Invisible College. And today I've got a very special and different lecture for you, which I think you're going to find of interest. We have this notion that everything's getting better, that there's this slope of development starting off from primitive things and getting better and better all the time. So we're going to explore what that means, and we're going to explore the ramifications of that, and then we're going to look at an alternative view which I think is perhaps more correct. So no more chat, let's get on with it. So what is progress? If we look here, I'm sure you've seen a diagram or picture like this, and it's generally shown as showing how man has evolved from primitive apes. Right, so you've got kind of like a chimpanzee, I guess, on the far left, and then you've got gradual progression of hominid types, gradually turning into what we would call a modern man, striving along into the future. And that is kind of a symbol of the modern day myth, the progressive myth, that mankind has just striven forwards, moving towards this better goal, a more perfect body, more upright in the way that he walks, more balanced in his features, altogether a much better specimen. Of course, when we look around us and we look at real men and women, we see that this is actually not the case. And a lot of the time, yes, there are perfect specimens. There are models, aren't there? Beautiful women, perfectly shaped. Beautiful men, wonderfully toned bodies. But the majority of people, not like that, are they? So it is a myth, this myth of the progressive man striving forwards. And we have this idea also that we're living longer, so we must be better. Well, we only live longer really because of modern medicine and how that prolongs the life of our bodies despite the way that we treat them. If we look here at the fossil record, we see a sort of the larger view of this. At first sight, the fossil record seems to support the idea of evolutionary progress leading to the appearance of the first man. So you can see there's the first man up on top, and down the bottom we got various kinds of wormy type things living in the sea. So over a period of roughly 650 million years or so, it's believed that animal life went from primitive worms to man. So it's going to go through all of those different stages in the course of its evolution. However, there are also many setbacks and even extinction events that nearly wiped out all life on Earth. Now, I've talked about this quite a bit in my revolution or evolution lectures, going into sort of a critique of Darwinism and what I think is really the truth. There's 3 lectures on that which you might find of interest, and it does talk about these particular extinction events which happened between some of these ages, when nearly all of the species that had been existing on Earth suddenly disappear within a very short period of time, and then other ones appear which don't seem to have ancestors in the ones that have gone, and there don't seem to be any transition forms in between. And this has got evolutionary biologists scratching their heads, and the only answer they can come up with is, well, the fossils must be there somewhere, it's just we haven't found them. Well, you could have got away with that argument in Darwin's day, back in the 19th century, but we've had plenty of time since then to search for them on land. And actually, you're not going to find them underwater because the oceans, the land under the oceans is quite new. And there aren't fossil records down there. It's all basaltic. So we have this conundrum: where are the missing links? And it's not just the famous missing link of man to the apes, the Piltdown hoax and all of that, but missing links throughout the fossil record. So this idea of progression of life, of evolution of life forms, going from the coarser to the finer to the ultimate, which is man, the crown of creation, is actually a kind of myth and not borne out at all by the fossil records. Let's look at another view of civilization. And in this view, we're going to look at civilization in terms of it evolving, going through various stages to reach up to the present, where we are now, which we see as being a very advanced civilization, perhaps the most advanced that there's ever been on Earth. So let's look at that and see where that takes us. So we start off with our primitive hunter-gatherers and the Paleolithic. Now those would be people the people that the man that we saw striving out from the apes, he would be one of these guys, the hunter-gatherer. He's going out there, he's got his spear, he's going to go and catch his food. His wife's busy picking berries and apples and whatever for the family diet. And that's kind of how they're living. So that's the first level, the hunter-gatherer. And then we get the first farmers. And it's generally thought around about 9,500 BC. Small family settlements happened where they started farming. And the place they think was the place where they started this, certainly one of the places, but perhaps the place, was in Turkey, what we would now call Turkey, eastern Anatolia. And they found there early types of grains, they found early implements. Interestingly, this place Göbekli Tepe that you hear a lot of on TV programs and commentators and Ancient Aliens and all these other places. What is interesting about that place is it dates back to around this time, actually, 9,500 years BC, very, very old. But there are these sculpted pillars with very, very good sculptures of animals and proto-human-like figures sculpted on them. So it seems like there's some kind of a civilization happened there that was making monuments which really are, we would not expect from that time. We would not expect those until the arrival of the first city-states, and yet there they are, and they've been carbon dated to around 9,500 BC, which would be around this time. But they have also reckoned that the people who built these things were actually hunter-gatherers. They weren't even the first farmers. So we're dealing with culture, the earliest culture we know of, going back to this Paleolithic period of the hunter-gatherers and before the farmers. And then we go on and we get into the Neolithic or New Stone Age. And that seems to begin around about 4,500 BC. We carry on our progress and we get to the early Bronze Age, circa 3,300 BC. So you start having these city-states, and of course then they start fighting among one another. And then you get the late Bronze Age, circa 2000 BC. These dates I'm giving you are very approximate. I'm not trying to be that accurate with this. And I don't know that anybody can be that accurate. We're dealing with epochs rather than specific years. And then we get into the early Iron Age, and in the early Iron Age we're getting major empires happening then. We're getting all the New Kingdom Egypt with Thutmosis I and Ramesses II, and big battles between empires and struggles. And they've got iron weapons which are much better. And then we get into more familiar territory with the forming of the Roman Empire. Now there'd been the Roman Republic before this, but in 31 BC we have the first Roman emperor as such, Augustus. And the Roman Empire, certainly in the West, carries on until AD 476. And then we get a big setback with the Dark Age. The Dark Age continues, and we get up to, I suppose, about 900. Arguably, you could say 1000 AD. Getting to the end of the Viking period, when you're getting things starting to settle down again, certainly in Western Europe, and we come into the next stage, which is the Middle Ages. And I would date that roughly from 900 to 1450. And that's an interesting period because 1453 is the date of the fall of Constantinople. You have the beginnings then of the next age, which is the Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth, and that really takes place between 1450 to 1600, I would say. It goes on up to, I would date the Renaissance up until about 1600. And so we move then into the next age, which we call the Enlightenment. Now I date that from roughly 1600, and then we go on further still. We come to the modern era, and I call that from 1900 to the present. So we're into the modern era, which is recognizable to us, and we would see that as being progress. We have made tremendous progress. Excuse me, my throat's getting a bit dry. We made tremendous progress from the time of the first farmers, only around about 10,000 years ago, up to the present, when we can contact each other on the internet. We can go on Skype or Zoom or whatever. You can be talking to your relatives and friends in Australia in real time, with pictures. You can see each other. It's like they're next door. It's extraordinary, and we've got to that position, and we feel very, very proud of ourselves. Give ourselves a pat on the back for being so progressive. Haven't we done well? Well, it's not stopped there even. The ultimate image of modern day progress, actually happening now, this is cutting edge, is Starship. And it's the huge spaceship being built by Elon Musk's SpaceX company. Now, I don't know if you've been following this. I have. I'm very interested in this. I follow it closely. This is not just like a regular spaceship like we've seen for the last 50 years. The whole point of Starship is that it's reusable. Musk plans to build an armada of 1,000 of these rockets in order to start a human colony on Mars. I mean, that's his ambition, is not just to build spaceships that we can put satellites into orbit, but to go back to the moon for a start, but more importantly, to go to Mars and start a human colony there. And each rocket will be capable of carrying up to 100 passengers. There will also be tankers and cargo rockets. The aim will be to create a self-sustaining colony in as short a time as possible. Now then, I mean, Mars is a bleak, desolate place where there appears to be no life except perhaps, and we don't know about that either, some primitive bacteria. I mean, it's a desert planet. The atmosphere is 1% as dense as Earth's, and is mostly CO2. The soil is poisonous with perchlorate, a powerful oxidizing agent. There is a little water in the form of ice at the poles and in some craters. The temperature goes down to around minus 153 degrees centigrade. I mean, that's cold. That is cold. That's at the poles. But it can reach a balmy plus 20 degrees centigrade at the equator. Well, I mean, you still need to be wearing a spacesuit, so you wouldn't be able to go out sunbathing. There's nothing for you to breathe if you take your spacesuit off, except carbon dioxide, and that's not going to do you any good. On the plus side, Mars has some spectacular geography that's not seen on Earth. There are huge canyons and towering mountains, and for the intrepid, it would be exciting to see and explore these features. Now, living on Mars would pose severe challenges for the human race. It would take all that our civilization has achieved so far to create a viable settlement. Absolutely it will. Mars is twice the distance from the Sun as Earth, and so receives much less light. Thus, growing crops for sustenance would need artificial lighting, right? So you're not going to be able to plant your potatoes outside. You've probably seen the movie The Martian, where he grows a crop of potatoes using a mixture of Martian soil and his own poop. Well, yes, I guess it's going to come down to that as well. Banks of solar cells would help, but nuclear energy is a better option, as so much power is needed for everything. So don't think that Mars is going to be a nuclear-free zone. It's not. Everything that we need, computers, communication, everything, is going to need energy, and we're not going to get that from the Sun, not enough of it. So there's going to need to be nuclear reactors or something like that on Mars to make that energy. In given time, it might be possible to create a self-sustaining colony. But who would want to live on Mars permanently? Now, I ask you that. This, what we're looking at, is the crown of civilization as we know it. This is where it's leading to. Towards a multi-planet civilization, colonies living on Mars, maybe on some of the asteroids, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, maybe going out to Pluto. Self-sustaining, energy generation from some kind of artificial source, and living under domes, living indoors all the time, except brief periods going outside in some kind of spacesuit. Is that really what we're about? But big cities, a place like Lagos, Nigeria, Nairobi, in Kenya, many other cities, a huge city like Cairo, dwarfs London. There are the huge cities with all their demands, their requirements of energy, their requirements of food, which they can't raise themselves, not in the city. They need oil, they need opportunities for work. We've reached a point now where our progress, what we consider to be progress, has reached a kind of peak. And I can see it, I think you can see it, that we can't really go on like this. Now, I want to pose another question to you. Does our progress make us happier than hunter-gatherers from the Amazon? Now, these ladies here, laughing and joking, they would be what we would call hunter-gatherers. Now, you remember the hunter-gatherers, right? Before 9,500 BC, hunter-gatherers, people living off the land. The men go out hunting, they go out hunting the cattle or the deer or whatever. The women do the cooking, they go gathering berries or digging up roots and looking after the children. That is hunter-gatherer life. And it's still going on today in certain places. But are we in our cities happier than them? Perhaps we are. But I want us to think a bit wider about the whole nature of progress and what it really means. Now then, in the ancient world, they had a concept of ages, how they had developed, starting with the Golden Age. I'm going to read out to you Golden Age, followed by Silver, Bronze and Iron Age. And I'm going to read out some little bits to you, what they said about that. So we start off with the Golden Age of Saturn. And the Golden Age was first, when man yet knew no rule but uncorrupted reason knew, and with a native bent did good pursue, unforced by punishment, unawed by fear. His words were simple and his soul sincere. Needless was written law where none oppressed. The law of man was written in his breast. The Golden Age, we have this sense that during the Golden Age there was peace, there was prosperity, nature provides, and there was innocence. This is kind of how they viewed the Golden Age of mankind. They didn't need to have laws because people were living truthfully, honestly to themselves, and they were uncorrupted. That's like the Garden of Eden, actually. I think that is another way to put it. Life in the Garden of Eden. Life in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, no clothes on, picking the fruit and living there. They don't know evil, they don't know wrong, they don't know anything about laws. They just live naturally. And that's seen as being the Golden Age. But there is a fall, isn't there? And that brings us to the Silver Age. But when good Saturn, banished from above, was driven to hell, the world was under Jove. Succeeding times a Silver Age behold, excelling brass, but more excelled by gold. Then summer, autumn, winter did appear. In other words, they start having seasons. And spring was but a season of the year. The sun his annual course obliquely made. Good days contracted and enlarged the bad. Then air with sultry heats began to glow. The wings of wind were clogged with ice and snow, and shivering mortals into houses driven sought shelter from the inclemency of heaven. These houses then were caves or homely sheds, with twining osiers fended and mossed their beds. Then ploughs for seed the fruitful furrows broke, and oxen laboured first beneath the yoke. Excuse my reading. My eyesight's not terribly good. Things happen as you get older. So I think you can understand what's saying here about the Silver Age. There's some coarsening. Seasons are more varied. In other words, it's not always a lovely spring. It can be too hot in summer. It can be too cold in winter. And there's the start of farming, and that means beasts having to plough the fields. And they're living in huts and caves, so they're not able to stay outdoors all the time. They've got to take shelter. So it's not quite the Golden Age anymore. It's still good, but it's the Silver Age that we've moved into. And to this came next the Brazen Age, a warlike offspring, prompt to bloody rage, not impious yet. So we move out of the Golden Age into the Copper Age, which is also later into the Bronze Age. And that's the beginning of warfare and the building of cities, commerce and trade. So this is actually what we would call the beginnings, really, of civilization. We've moved beyond the hunter-gatherers, we've moved even beyond the first farmers. We're starting to get into the point where people are living in cities, or certainly small towns, and there's commerce. You know, one person makes one thing, someone else does something else. Someone does the farming, someone does the weaving to make clothes, someone else is smelting but the copper and the bronze. So there's different jobs, and there has to be some kind of trade to offset that. So we're moving into a more modern kind of way of life, and of course that brings conflict and warfare between different groups. And then we move into the fourth age, which is the Iron Age. And in the Iron Age, well, need I say, there's incessant warfare, cruelty and depravity. So we've seen that the ultimate in that is the Roman Empire, of course, which comes at, towards the end of the Iron Age. The enslavement of other men and women to do the work so that an elite can live comfortably without having to work, or not so much. There is prosperity for some, there's poverty for others, there's great inequality, there are big cities, there's large armies, there's fighting between not just independent cities, but whole empires composed of numbers of cities fighting for domination of the earth, or for their part of the earth. And this is progress. Is it? Or is it the opposite of that? So the theory of ages as a downward rather than upward progression was commonly understood in the ancient world. So you find it's not just in Ovid, but you'll find it in other places too, like Hesiod, for instance. And it was believed that during the Golden Age, mankind was in touch with the gods, whoever they might be. Now, of course, in the Bible, the gods is the Elohim, plural word, actually. When it's translated as God in our English text, but it's actually a plural word. It means the Els or the Elos. And later ages were progressively harder and coarser as mankind went further and further away from the true rule of law. So there's this rule of law in nature. And in Roman times, the concept of the law was personified as a goddess, Astrea. However, she was no longer on earth, but returned to heaven. And before I go into talk a bit more about Astrea, I just want us to think for a minute about this world that we live in, which we take for granted. We're so used to it. We're so used to seeing it. Now I've got my computer here. I've got mouse here. There are books. There's live in a house, and electricity, and yet out of the window there is nature. There are trees growing. There's grass. There are flowers. We're not in flower at the moment because it's winter time, but there's nature. And the strange thing is that this planet was all nature. It was all just things growing. And if something was needed, they didn't go out, a lion or a tiger or even a gorilla. They don't go out sort of digging in the ground to get minerals and make a little fire and melt down the stone to get the metal out of it so they can make some metal tools and gradually build things and make transistors and make radio sets and spaceships. The concept of making a spaceship, it doesn't exist in nature. What nature does is it grows things. You take the seed, plant the seed, and it grows according to its kind. Mostly that is, flowers or trees or plants, but there's also the seeds of animals, aren't there? Eggs. Take the egg and nurture it. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Well, that's another thought, isn't it? But certainly, there are animals which just lay eggs and sit on them and look after them, and they hatch, and you get a small version of that animal, and it grows. And that's how things develop on this planet. Change the coding, and you grow something different. That seems to be the way of nature. Now, of course, the modern Darwin theory is that it all happens spontaneously, that things just change, and survival of the fittest, all the ones that didn't work don't go on, but the ones that did succeed. Well, I can tell you, as a former computer programmer, to just randomly change the genetic code of the DNA and hope that it's going to produce a good result is madness. You know, to produce something as complex as a kidney would require enormous brain power and understanding, not just of the kidney itself that you're trying to achieve, and you're going to grow it, remember, you're going to grow it from cells, but in relationship to all the other organs in that body, you know, the heart, the liver, you know, the spleen, the brain, and they all have to work together in harmony. They all have to be supplied with blood, they all have to be supplied with oxygen, you know, they need nutrients, all the rest of it. It takes a tremendous intelligence to come up with something like that and to code it into DNA so that you can put it into an egg, just one cell, and it will just expand and grow into that thing that you want. That doesn't just happen. That doesn't just happen. It takes an intelligence much higher than Elon Musk even to make that happen. So we're being very, very naive and stupid to think it can just happen, you know, with random chance events and then survival of the fittest. It's nonsense, and it's a lie, and it's very insulting to the high intelligence that did create, let's call it the Elohim, did create all these things. So we're living in a strange situation on this planet where we need more and more laws all the time. More laws are being churned out. Whereas we were told in the Golden Age they didn't have any laws because it was all in their breasts. They all knew what was right and wrong. So they didn't need to be told. They didn't need laws. And it's a funny thing about civilization that the more laws you require, the lower grade your civilization is. If you can get away with 10 commandments, and the people are sensible enough to be able to interpret that if it says do not steal, that applies to everything. Don't steal anything. Is this making any sense to you? Well, let's just see what the ancients had to say about Astrea. In Greco-Roman times, Astrea was understood as personifying justice. Her reign brought peace and prosperity, a golden age. So she was there on Earth at the time of the Golden Age. This Astrea is the virgin, the star virgin. After mankind became corrupt, especially in the Bronze Age, so she fled the earth and returned to the heavens. Right, so there's no longer any justice here. In other words, the ages after gold were not viewed as progressive, but rather the reverse. Justice, the goddess Astrea, could just about tolerate the Silver Age, but she found the atmosphere of the Bronze and Iron Ages unbearable. She fled from the earth. So justice went out of the earth. The Greco-Roman goddess Astrea was based on the Egyptian goddess Ma'at. She too personified justice and truth. Both were linked to the constellation of Virgo. That's interesting because the constellation of Virgo is right next to the constellation of Libra. At one time, actually, they were all part of the same constellation. So she was holding the balances, justice holding the balances. And that the connection between Astrea, the Virgin, who holds the balances of truth. So you need to be truthful and honest and good, is what it's saying, if you want to go to heaven. Simple enough, it really, isn't it? It's not so very different from what we believe in the Christian world today. Now you can see the feather in her hat. In the classical world, there was a yearning for a new golden age, and this was linked to the idea of the return of Astrea, or Ma'at, i.e. true justice. So this is what they yearned for. This is progress. Progress was if justice was back on earth. And in Tudor England, Elizabeth I was hailed as the personification of Astrea. Now, there's something you maybe don't know, that she was actually praised and viewed as being the incarnation of Astrea. There's a kind of cult round her. Poems were written about her alluding to this. There was even a sort of cult of Astrea among her courtiers. Her long reign was mostly peaceful, and England enjoyed a period of prosperity. The Tudor age, or certainly the Elizabethan age, was a prosperous time in England. This encouraged a flourishing of the arts, the promotion of science, and, compared with the earlier Tudor period, a fair degree of religious tolerance, at least for most people. Little wonder, then, that England's virgin queen was compared to the starry virgin Astrea. Now, Elizabeth as Astrea and the golden age of late Tudor England lies outside the theme of this lecture, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. But if you would like to know more about this subject, then I highly recommend this book by the late Dame Frances Yates. She was a brilliant historian with a depth of knowledge and interest that puts her far ahead of other historians of the period. Now, before I leave this lecture, I just want us to look again at Christianity here. And for Christians, the return of the Golden Age is prophesied in the book of Revelation. It's not quite called that, but that's what it is. After a difficult period of strife, earth changes and huge distress, this is in the book of Revelation. We've been covering some of this in our lectures on the book of Revelation. I think I'm up to about number 20, and I must start doing some more soon. I've taken a break from that for a while. It's prophesied that Jesus Christ, along with an entourage of angels and saints, will return to earth. So they've been all hoping for Astrea to come back to earth. We are hoping and looking forward to Jesus Christ coming back to earth, which is promised in the Bible. Both in the Gospels and the Epistles, but also in the book of Revelation. For 1,000 years, this is what's called the Millennium, he himself will rule as king over the whole earth, judging the wicked and bringing back the rule of true law, and all will be set to rights. In other words, it's talking about the establishment of a new golden age. And this is real progress. This is what progression means in a real way, is the re-establishment of the rule of true law and reconnection to God. That's what it's all about. It's not about starships going to Mars. Maybe they will do. Maybe that is something that is meant to happen as well. I don't know. But the establishment of peace on earth, the lamb being able to lie down with the lion, that can only happen under the situation where the lion's not hungry. The lion doesn't need to gobble up the lamb because it's being fed in other ways. And that is what the Golden Age is all about. And Satan, who will be bound up during this period, will then be released one last time. This is what it says in the Revelation. At the end of the 1,000 years, he and his angels are released, and there's going to be a final big battle. This will be a test for the human race. And after that, there will be a new earth and a new heaven for those who pass the test. In other words, the return of the Golden Age for real. Now, whether it means that new earth and new heaven is going to be a reconditioning of this earth and a reconditioning of the sun and a reconditioning of the heaven, or whether it means a completely different solar system that those souls are going to be taken to, I don't know. I do know that there is going to be the opportunity to rise to higher levels, and it does seem that there is going to be a reset of the earth. so that we get back to being connected again to God and to nature, not having to do things through our coarse kind of civilization, our Iron Age approach, to dig out everything we want, to exploit it industrially, to make things, and while we ourselves eat too much and get pot bellies and sick, and is talking about something very, very big indeed. And that seems to be, to me, what the real progress is going to be. If you're a materialist, you probably think this is completely nuts. But for those of us who do believe in supernatural and supernatural possibilities, natural possibilities as well, this is going to be the way forward. So thank you if you've managed to listen all the way through. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do, because we're getting near to 800 now. I need another 218 or something to get to 1,000, and that is a really important mark with YouTube. So if you can help me do that, I'll be very, very grateful. If you want to get on the mailing list, then send an email to admin.invisiblecollege@protonmail.com. Right? Just write to me, Adrian Gilbert, at admin.invisiblecollege@protonmail.com, and I'll add you to the mailing list. You won't be spammed. You won't have that email address given to anyone else or sold to anyone or anything like that. It just means that we can stay in touch should something happen with YouTube. Even better, please think about becoming a patron through patreon.com. You'll be able to find me on patreon.com. You can join the different levels of setting up the college. I'm going to be getting the website up and running soon, I hope. I've been struggling with it, but it's going to come, and I send out newsletters to those people as well, and you'll be getting other content in addition. And it costs you no more than £5 to join per month. So thank you. I'll put those details down below here, and look forward to hearing from you. Take care and happy progress.